a little bit more. There's a need for members of our company to understand a little bit more about why the school should go into a multi-academy trust, how the students and how the staff and how the communities of those trusts would benefit. Now, before I go any further, a couple of housekeeping announcements. If you could keep your microphones muted when you're not speaking, that would be helpful. Secondly, we are recording this event this evening, as we've had some apologies, and we would like those people to be able to view it later. So if you're unhappy about your picture being in the recording, please turn your video off. We have planned the session so there will be plenty of time for questions and discussion. And what I would like to suggest is that you put your questions in the chat. We're a nice number, we all fit on one screen, so we will hopefully be able to do this informally. But if you can put your questions in the chat, that will give me an opportunity to just marshal them a little bit. Now, I have said just about as much as I can that contributes positively to the evening, to give Anthony Wilson time to join us, and he is not here. So we will go to Plan B, which is to introduce the second of our speakers, which is our own David Gracie, a liveryman, a trustee of the Mulberry Schools Trust, and also the chair of Mulberry Academy Shoreditch. And David is going to share with us some of the governance aspects of multi-academy trusts. So David, can I hand to you, please?
Thank you, David, and good evening, everyone. Good to see lots of familiar faces on the screen here. So yes, you'll have to bear with me because some of what I'm about to say was meant to have been preluded by the information you're going to get from Anthony. So we may have to just wing it a little bit in that respect. But I think before I start, I mean, one of the reasons that I joined the livery company back in 2012-13 is because I was really impressed with the level of support on that, particularly the education committee is giving to schools and supporting the area, supporting apprentices as well. I can see Shirley's on as well with the apprenticeship program, because I think for many people, joining the livery company is also about finding an opportunity to give back. And certainly the work that we are doing with multi-academy trusts, both at Rokeby and at Mulberry, gives all of us the opportunity to get involved and to give back. I think just to give you a very brief definition, and hopefully Anthony will join and give more information, but an academy trust it's a single school. It is directly funded from the Department for Education, and it is independent of the local authority in which it sits. So, whereby previously, Mulberry sit in Tower Hamlets. Normally, funding would come through there, and everything would be aligned to the way that Tower Hamlets wants to run its schools. This, the Mulberry Academy Shoreditch, is independent of Tower Hamlets. It does align itself to a lot of what Tower Hamlets does, but it is independent and has the ability to make its own decisions. And when we talk about multi-academy trusts, what we're effectively talking about is a collection of schools that operate within the same organisation. So that just gives you a little bit of a background, just to make sure that we're on the same page there, and to say hopefully Anthony will be able to come in and explain a bit more about some of the benefits and so on of running that. What I was looking to focus on were more about the governance implications and also the opportunities for livery companies to support. So I'll plan on just giving a bit of background about the sort of journey that we've been on so far with Mulberry, talk a bit about the current setup, and then talk about some of the scaling up challenges that we're currently going through as well. So as a bit of background, I first got involved with Mulberry back in 2015 when it was then known as the Bethnal Green Academy. And the reason that that came about is that, my organisation, we just sold the company to KPMG. KPMG were really active in promoting corporate social responsibility, and my team were keen to get involved in some way or other. And I suppose rather than just kind of picking a charity or an organisation that KPMG had selected, I wanted to sort of try and pick something that probably had a bit more meaning to us and was certainly local in the area. And it was Charles Leadsom who suggested that we do something with Bethnal Green Academy, that we'd just been trying to develop a relationship there. So I took my team along from KPMG and delivered a series of employability workshops to the sixth formers. And it was just talk about CVs, applications, interviews, and also about networking as well, just to give the sixth formers a bit of a steer as to what they might need to be thinking about when they're ready for applying for a job. That went very well. And on the back of that, I was then asked if I would be interested in joining what was then known as the Greenspring Education Trust Board. And it was an interesting time for them then, because the Greenspring Education Trust, which was the multi-academy trust that was responsible for Bethnal Green Academy, but at that time there was only the one school in that academy, so effectively it was a single academy trust. But the government had tasked it with the job of taking on more schools and effectively saying, we think you've done a great job running Bethnal Green Academy. We want you to replicate that and take it into other schools that might not be performing as well. So that's the reason that the Greenspring Education Trust was started. And then I was invited to join that trust board. Now, I think it's fair to say it's been, and some of you will know some of these stories more than others. Have probably heard me explain some of the situations and predicaments that we might have found ourselves in over the years. It's fair to say it has been a roller coaster, but it's something which has been incredibly rewarding at the same time. Thinking back to that first year, 2015, 2016, clearly there were ambitions to grow and to take more schools under the remit of the Greenspring Trust. And that involved then looking at schools that were in difficulty, or looking to build new schools in areas that needed additional resource. So the first year was quite exciting, but it was clear that there were some challenges about the way that the executive management were settling into a multi-academy trust and all of the kind of different responsibilities that come with running more than one school or looking to extend out. Now, obviously, this is, what we went through is confidential, but it's fair to say that in year two, we went through a period of crisis management. So I'm not going to disclose the details, but this resulted in a significant change in senior leadership at the school, which ultimately led to the CEO of the trust and the chair of the trust leaving, as well as a number of other bodies as well. So at this point, we've suddenly gone from, we want to grow this multi-academy trust, to actually, how can we make sure that this particular school actually stays afloat and we're able to provide the right support for the students here. So we then went into year three, where we then had to go into sort of transition. And we were working very closely with the Department for Education as to what we could do best for the school. And our options were effectively to continue to operate as a single academy trust, but financially, that's just not a viable option. The reason that multi-academy trusts work is because you start to benefit from the economies that come from running multiple schools. So operating as a single academy was never really going to be on the cards. The other option was then to rebuild, to continue with the Greenspring Education Trust and to bring in some new leadership and to effectively start the plan afresh. But I think clearly then you've got to find the individuals, and you've got to then build the trust of that had been broken, quite frankly, at that time. Or the third option was to move the school into another multi-academy trust. So we went through a period there of speaking with several multi-academy trusts, and we were wanting to understand what their values were, where might this school be a good fit. And I'm delighted that we were able to find Mulberry. They supported us through this period of crisis. So in September 2018, we formally joined the Mulberry Schools Trust, and myself and a lady who was the chair of governors, or the chair of the Greenspring Trust Board even, both of us transitioned across to Mulberry at the same time to try to provide some continuity at that point. A new executive head then joined the school, and it's been a roaring success ever since, thankfully. So what do we look like today? What does Mulberry Academy Shoreditch look like today? So we've got a new name, got a new uniform, got new house system in place and everything like that. So it does look very, very different to what it did back in 2015. But Mulberry Academy Shoreditch is part of the Mulberry Schools Trust. Now, Mulberry Schools Trust, even back in 2018 when we joined, consisted of just 3 schools. It was the Mulberry School for Girls, it was the Mulberry UTC, and Mulberry Academy Shoreditch. In just 4 years now that we're coming up to, that trust has now expanded to 6 schools, which includes those that will be opening later this year, plus a school which is currently being built in London Dock as well. And if you're in that kind of in the neck of woods of Wapping, you may see lots of advertising for the new Mulberry School that's being created there. So as part of the trust, there's a clear strategy in place for us to grow, and I'll talk a bit more about some of the challenges that come with that as well. But in terms of the school itself, following the crisis period, what we had at that point was admission numbers into year 7, the first year of high school. They dropped significantly from 180 down to 120. So you've suddenly got a situation where you've got a year group which is 60 pupils short, times the money that you get for each student in the school, and we've now got this year group rolling through the school where we've got that financial shortfall. So we've had to do a number of things to sort of try to manage that. But actually, the way we've been able to be incredibly successful is with the 6th form. So when I first joined the 6th form, it had only just been created a few years previous, but there were 40 students in the 6th form in both lower 6th and upper 6th, so years 12 and 13. That number has now grown to 420. And it is a thriving hub. We now have separate area for the 6th form. It's also led to us been given some growth funding from the government to support with this, because clearly when you have such a boost in numbers, you need more teachers, you need more resources, you need that quickly. So you're able to get access to growth funding. All of that helped to fill the shortfall of that was created there. And I would say that under some really exceptional leadership from the new head teacher and the senior leadership team, which is frankly outstanding, and there's a real pipeline of talent there. We're seeing students perform well at exams, and most importantly, they're actually able to go to school and learn in a safe and happy environment. And that is something which is just really important. And I think when we talk about some of this stuff, it's very important actually to come back to what is it we're trying to do here. And it is trying to provide students with a happy, safe learning place. The culture has changed hugely as well. It is now incredibly vibrant, enthusiastic, very positive, and there's a real can-do attitude. And I love going there. Every time I go to see some of the students, you walk away feeling inspired and motivated. I remember delivering one of these workshops, and one of the students came up to me after speaking with the laptop open saying, "What do you think about this? I've been creating this whilst we've been talking." And I was like, "My God, this is..." Well, first of all, I was quite grateful that we're paying attention. But the fact that they then came up afterwards and were really getting involved, I think it just sort of shows a real energy and buzz that exists around the place. And then also, what's really important is that there's now a really strong relationship that exists between staff, students, parents, and the wider community as well. So that's just a bit of a background to kind of the journey that we've been on with the school over the past few years, and the livery company have been able to support that through sort of Ted and Angela going in as well, and we'll talk a bit more about some of the work they've been doing, but also just be able to support with some donations on things like musical instruments to get the arts, music and arts scene a bit more vibrant, because quite frankly it was an empty room really, and now actually you go in and they've got it all going on there. So it's a real positive. Now in terms of the governance implications, I mean, I think, what are the aims from a governance perspective for Mulberry Schools Trust? So, you know, our vision is to be a key provider for quality education so that all students leave as highly qualified, confident, articulate young people with a wealth of experience, and to really just help students reach their potential. Now, our aims are very similar to what we would deem to be good governance in other sectors, which fundamentally I see is boiling down to making sure you've got the right people making the best decisions at the correct level in an informed way. There's a real emphasis on making sure that information flows properly through the trust from each of the individual schools up to the trust board. Now, I think Mulberry Schools Trust does this particularly well. There's a real focus on making sure there's a connection between each of the individual schools and the trust board. And I'd like to say that you think that's a given, but clearly it's not. And I think when Green Spring was formed, I would say one of the things that it just didn't work was that there was a lot of separation and there was a lot of silo working. So the Green Spring Trust Board had very, very little interaction with the local governing body. And it was very difficult to understand, well, what's your responsibility? What should we be doing? And there was no real clear guidance and steer on that. Like, Mulberry have put together a really strong framework, which helps to provide that terms of reference, if you like, so everyone understands exactly what their role and their responsibility is. Now, in terms of the sort of setup, starting right at the top, what you have the company members, and we've got 5 company members, and they're responsible for upholding the values and the ethos of the trust, and ultimately they have the power to appoint and to remove trustees. Sitting below the members, you then have the trust board. So the trust board is responsible for the vision and strategic direction of the trust, its financial strategy, and the appointment of all the governors, except for the staff and parent governors, and responsible for the overall performance of each individual school that sits within the trust. Now, like most boards, you can delegate responsibility to various committees. So underneath the trust board, we have a finance committee and we have a standards committee. Now, the finance committee, as you would expect, is looking at all of the figures, ensuring that we've got the right budgets in place, that we are tracking that through the year. And we meet on a regular basis, but we also have real deep dives into each individual school from time to time to make sure that we really understand how each school is performing in that area. And on the standards committee, that is a separate committee that is focusing purely on exam performance, the teaching and learning, to ensure that each of the schools is performing as we would want it to and reaching its targets. And then sitting underneath the trust board, across each of the individual schools sits a local governing body who are responsible for the oversight of that individual school and ensuring that the trust's policies and strategies are being properly implemented. Now, the way that we work at Mulberry is that each of the local governing body is chaired by someone who sits on the trust board. And that really helps to ensure you've got that connection between the individual school and the trust. And that helps, it helps with the communication flow. It helps to ensure that knowledge has been properly shared. Where we are now is we're now sort of coming to the point of what I'm calling the scale up challenge. And I think this is where the expertise of governance professionals is really important. And I'm working very closely with the executive management team and the chair of the trust board to think about what our governance model and framework should look like for the future, because quite simply, the trust is growing. We're at 6 already. We are being asked to take on and support other schools. There is going to be a limit to how many trustees you can have on the board. And how much time trustees have to devote, because I think we also have to remember that all trustees are volunteers. There is clearly another argument, potentially we can have this debate later, as to whether some trustee positions like the chair of the trust boards should be paid, given the importance, the time that's required, and quite simply the amount of money that flows through the schools of all the trusts. Should that be left to a volunteer? I don't know, we can have that debate. But where we are now is, how do we manage it? How do we ensure that when we're being on these new schools, there is a capacity limit? How can we make sure we're still the same level of reporting? So some of the questions we're asking ourselves are, should sub-boards be set up? And how would you divide that? Should it be secondary schools and primary schools? Should it be by regions? There's not necessarily a right or a wrong answer in all this. I mean, some of my fellow trustees feel very strongly about the fact that actually they don't want to have sub-boards. They want to try to keep that connection as long as possible. I think the other thing that then comes down to is the reporting, because I think we have to recognise that at the moment, with the trust the size it is, all of us on the trust board, we know our schools. We go to them on a regular basis. That's possible when we're this size. When there's 15, 20 schools, how are you going to ensure that you actually really know what's going on in each of the schools? So I think on a reporting perspective, I anticipate seeing a bit more of a data-driven approach, so you can have consistency across the piece and try to identify some of the outliers. But I think what we want to ensure is that we still retain that kind of personal knowledge and history, if you like, of each of the schools. So it's going to be some of the challenges. And, as I say, there isn't necessarily a right or wrong answer, but whenever is that the case in governance, there's always nuance, there's always grey areas, and it's being able to sort of understand what's going to work best for this individual trust. And of course, at the same time, we're also thinking about leadership challenges as well. So we're looking to push through changes aligned to our diversity agenda. So how can we make sure that the trust board, the local governing bodies, how can we make sure that those actually reflect the communities that we're serving? And how can we make sure that there are enough role models? I mean, the diversity makeup at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch in particular, there's a huge number from the Bangladeshi community. What does our local governing body look like? Do they have people on that board that the students can relate to? What does our trust board look like? So there's a whole piece that we're doing to improve the diversity agenda there as well. Some of that includes some of the partnerships that we have. So we can be very proud of the partnership that we've got with Mercedes, the Formula One team. Even today, I just noticed that Lewis Hamilton was promoting gender diversity about how the stewards should be operating. But this is something that Mercedes are also doing with Mulberry Academy Shoreditch and the trust. They've set up a STEM academy because they want to see more engineers and mechanics and so on coming from a diverse background. So this is the starting point that they've got to sort of try to increase that. So that's kind of some of the stuff that we're doing there. And in terms of then about opportunities for livery companies to support, and I think firstly, I'd just like to say a great big thank you to the livery company for their ongoing support, because it always comes down to two things. Ugly words may be, but it's time and money. Always is, always will be with this, because all these trust boards, all of the local governing bodies, they are looking for individuals to volunteer their time, to give their expertise, to support the running of the schools and for the trust as well. So I think, how can people get involved? I think, first of all, in the time, you could look to become a governor or a trustee. And I know from the Education Committee that we're talking about, well, we're without the schools that we're part of becoming part of the multi-academy trusts, there are now more schools available. And is it an option for us to look to volunteer someone to sit on the local governing body of some of the other schools that sit within the multi-academy trust? So I would definitely recommend becoming a governor or a trustee. I mean, the broad commitment, just to give an indication, is typically there'll be meetings each term of both of the board, the finance committee, the local governing body meetings. And then on top of that, you get to do the fun things like actually go into the school and see some of the events taking place as well. And that where they have some of the sort of plays and stuff, it's incredible to sort of see what these students are able to achieve as well. There is definitely, and I think Anthony's be able to join us, so he'll be able to explain a bit more about the multi-academy trust setup. But there is definitely, and excuse the Americanism, but a need to professionalize the governance for multi-academy trusts, and that's where I feel that those of us who are part of this livery company are well placed to be able to support with that agenda. Now, clearly that's the ongoing commitment, but there's other things that you can do to get involved. And the work that Angela and Ted do at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch in particular on the mentoring side of things is incredible. They've built fantastic relationships with the students to support them with the Sheriff's Challenge. And I know that David has done likewise at Roteby as well. But those interactions just give a completely different perspective to those students on what city life is like, the confidence that it gives them when they're presenting in situations that they just wouldn't have come across before is just absolutely amazing, and the time they give up and devote to that is incredible. So it's just a huge thanks to Ted and Angela for that. And then likewise, if you've got other organisations or companies that they're looking for partnerships all the time as well. So I know KPMG were able to provide some regular support to the school. London Stock Exchange have also done the same. So if your organisation that you're involved with are keen to do something, definitely feel free to look to develop a partnership with the Multi-Academy Trust that we're also involved with. And then on the financial side of things, as I say, the money that's been donated to the schools to buy musical instruments in particular, the music department at Mulberry Academy Shoreditch was in a terrible state of affairs. All of a sudden, we've got real active interest in this, and we've got the tools now or instruments to allow people to actually get involved. And I think even Ted managed to pick up a guitar at an auction for whatever price it was, but it was he brought it in and just said, "Oh, I've got this as well." So there's always options to get involved that side of things as well. And then I think the other important thing about the sort of fundraising, I was talking to the head teacher earlier on today, is that we have to remember that for these students and for all of us, we've just been through COVID, but for these students in particular, their schooling was incredibly disrupted. And all of the fun things that you used to be able to do at school, some of the trips and so on, that's been completely curtailed. So even with the students being able to get back to school, it's still been very classroom heavy. Now that the school's in a position, they want to give all of the students the opportunity to go on trips, to go camping in the weekend, and particularly for schools like Mulberry Academy Shoreditch, they don't get a lot of outdoor space. It's a heavily densely populated area. The opportunity to go camping for the weekend in the countryside is just amazing, but all of that comes at a cost, and that's something that there's a huge fundraising drive to sort of try to promote as many enrichment activities as possible. So I would thoroughly recommend getting involved. It is a role that it's challenging, but it is rewarding, and I know that it's certainly it's given me some of the most proudest moments of my professional career as well. I think the one that stands out for me will always be when I was sat at my desk in Canary Wharf, and someone one of the young lad came up to me and just said, "Oh, David, I just want to say hello," and I was thinking, so who is this? And as it turned out, he was one of the students that was sat at the back taking notes, and he applied for the KPMG apprenticeship program, got through, and he came up to say hello. Of course, I thought, well, that's brilliant. He's got in. So I said, guess what you're doing? You're coming back to the sixth form to tell them exactly how this all works. So he was able to share the stories to all of the students that were in the year below him. So it was a fantastic experience for him, and he had great fun going back and doing that. So that's probably all I would say. I mean, David, I don't know how you want to play it, whether want to take some questions now, or whether it's an opportunity for Anthony to explain a bit more about the technicalities about MATs.
What I'd like to do, David, first of all, is to say thank you, because I think you've done a brilliant job, not only in covering what we had asked you to cover, but also of picking up those bits of introduction which Anthony, whom we can now welcome, was going to put at the front of his piece. So what I'd like to do is just say a word to Anthony, to invite Anthony, and then we take questions at the end. because there will be some overlap of between what you have both said, not necessarily in the words, but the issues. Anthony, I did explain to colleagues, not in too much detail, that you did have a family issue and that your input tonight may be restricted in some way, but we're absolutely delighted that you are able to join us. Anthony is the Chief Executive of the Newham Schools Community Trust, which contains Rokeby, which is of particular interest to us, but also, and this is not yet widely known in delivery, we were asked to provide a member of the governing body for Eastleigh Community School. And we're not in a position to announce a name yet, but we did advertise it. We did have volunteers, and I believe a meeting either has taken place or will shortly take place. And there's evidence of this sort of organic strategy of the Education Committee to support the rest of the trusts. Now, Anthony, just by way of information, you and David, of course, both had distinctive contributions to make to tonight. David, prior to sharing some of the governance issues, did cover some of the basics of what a MAT was. So you can probably speed through that. But what David didn't cover is something I know you're going to do, and that is the advantages of the MAT and the benefits that they bring to the local schools, to the teachers, to the communities, and the quality benefits. So I wonder, with that bit of guidance, if I can welcome you and invite you to share with this webinar. You're muted.
Certainly, thank you, David. And I don't know if the host is can enable participant screen sharing, because I did do a little PowerPoint to talk through, and I am now the co-host, so I will click share screen again. And if you'll just bear with me a moment, we'll see if we can get the right section up. I have to just maximize something for it to be fully with you. I think that should be appearing, and we'll go to here and here. Can I just check, because I'm doing this on a Mac, so I can only see what I am sharing now.
It's perfect, David. It's perfect, Anthony.
Okay, so please feel free, since I can't see your facial reactions, to heckle if at any point if I'm moving too slowly. But I have a couple of questions there, which I hope align with what you were just saying, David. And it is very nice to be here, and thank you very much for the invitation. We've got there the official version of what an academy is, and I won't spend too much time on this. This is from the DFE website. You all know that academies are state-funded schools. But I think the thing that I'm going to focus on in the first few slides is really the fact that we're operating in a very imperfect system. And this isn't criticism for the sake of it. It is just actually understanding when you get involved in a trust, whether as a head teacher moving into a trust, or a member of staff, or as somebody who is a volunteer coming in from the on the governance side as a governor in a local governing body, or as a trustee. I think many of us sometimes suffer from the illusion that there is an organized system that you're going to operate in that makes sense. And that can be a mistake. It's certainly a mistake when you look at the education system in England, because even the DFE's attempt to summarize it here has to acknowledge the fact that whatever are called academies come into being as academies rather than as maintained local authority schools in very different routes. And we are inheriting the results of a classically evolutionary system rather than one that has been thoroughly reformed at any stage. We still have a very large number of local authority schools. We have academies which came into being early on, when the idea of academies was that they would be city academies, which were focused on really putting extra resources into a small number of schools in very particular areas. We also have free schools. We also have the underlying agenda of reducing the influence of local authorities. And I've put in there classic British over-centralisation. I don't think many people appreciate fully how for all the rhetoric of academies existing as a way of giving power back to schools, and there is an element of that, and we'll come to that, it is also an enormous land grab by the Department for Education, in that all academies are ultimately set up with a funding agreement with the Secretary of State. And therefore, it's the Department for Education which has the power to make decisions over intervention. Used to be, so intervention when a school is struggling and requires external intervention formally, used to be the prerogative of the local authority, but it now goes to the Secretary of State. And that means we are working in one of the most centralized systems in the developed world. So having highlighted those problems in the system, that it is a very incoherent system, very tightly regulated. I would add also that when you're a head teacher, you're whether in a maintained school or in a state school, you're dealing with a highly unionized workforce. You're also dealing with, if you're an academy, the Education Skills Funding Agency, as well as the Department for Education, as well as Ofqual. You have a huge range of statutory requirements on you. So it's very tightly regulated. Very high stakes sharing of information on how you do, very major consequences from the publication of your performance data, and very little checking, except by Ofsted occasionally, on how those results were achieved. The process of academization itself is quite painful, and it can be made much more painful in areas such as Newham, where there is a strong local opposition, political opposition to academies. The local authority recently has been opposing academization. So you might ask, why do it? And I think that this does come back to the element of, while ultimately we are centrally controlled by the Department for Education, there is something in my experience in schools and my journey. I started in schools just over 25 years ago. I spent 8 years as a civil servant. I worked for the Foreign Office for the first 8 years of my working life. And then I decided I didn't want to be an ambassador. I maybe was put in mind of the quote from Churchill that head teachers have powers that are unknown to any other public figure. But having gone into education, I went in at a point when you were clearly in a local authority school, and the local authority schools were very often left to get on with it. We've been formally told that we're on our own as the capacity of local authorities to support and challenge schools has eroded. And the government gave strong financial incentives to become academies. But I think the single feature which is most important in a way in understanding how academies really work and why they have become so effective and some of their potential is that schools are really being put in the hands of people who have run schools themselves. So when I was appointed as a head teacher in a local authority school, I sat in front of a panel of about 9 or 10 people, not one of whom had ever been a head teacher, whereas every other appointment in schools tends to be made by people with experience of that. So it's quite an interesting shift that we now, working as multi-academy trusts, we have a situation where head teachers, rather than being isolated, can draw on a network of other head teachers and, of course, on their trust board and their governors, and in some cases on a chief executive officer and or a school improvement advisor. And let's look at what the head teacher's job is for a moment, because clearly the thing that we will all be asked is when we're thinking about what we're needing to focus on is the quality of education. And you'll excuse my just flicking through a few of the other things, some of which a head teacher newly appointed to role will understand well, some of which other people on this call will have far more experience of from their professional lives than many people coming into being a head teacher for the first time. HR issues, finance, And well, I'm just going to click through quickly all the things that can come up, can hugely distract, but are in each in their own way a different specialist area. And I think that my reflection on this, having been through the journey of moving into senior management, becoming a head teacher, and now being in the position of chief executive of a group of 4 schools, is to consider how a trust can bring benefits, because head teachers are so, it is such a different job that they are in some ways so inadequately prepared for in the existing, pre-existing system where there were local authority schools. Premises management was formerly a responsibility of the local authority. HR was often done by the local authority, but in the new dispensation, the local authority doesn't have the capacity to support in those areas effectively. So where is that support going to come from? As a head teacher, you want all the time to be focusing on the quality of education, but you have this wide range of responsibilities, and without a trust to work within, who is going to take away some of that other significant administrative burden so that you can focus on what you most want to focus on? I've spoken a lot up to this point about the role of the head teacher and why head teachers might want to work in a trust arrangement where they get that support. I now come on to governance. I don't think with any area of professional life it's ever a good idea to allow the professionals to be the sole people who decide whether the job is being done well or not. You always need external validation and quality assurance. Even if we see many positives, I think, about moving into a situation where schools are supported and administered by teams of people with a lot of experience within the schools, and there's mutual support between head teachers and different people in schools. You clearly have that issue of narrowness of experience in certain key areas, and the danger of groupthink. I think, again, speaking to trustees and potential trustees who have not got experience of schools, there is, in my view, a need to emphasize what can go wrong. And it comes down to a core trinity of issues, which are the issues on which previously the local authority could intervene. In a trust, the DFE can intervene. And if these are the issues which are regarded as being serious enough for external intervention, they are clearly going to be a priority for the trustees. And school standards and safeguarding are ones where head teachers are often relatively confident. Many head teachers like myself have done a huge amount of work on safeguarding before they come into that role, and standards of education are bread and butter. But financial management, a school of about 1,500 students, such as the one I was head teacher of in Newham, may have an annual turnover of around £10 million. The 4 schools that we have in our trust at the moment have a theoretical value for their buildings and land of over £200 million. Now, if you've spent most of your career considering how you're going to get low attainers in English to engage more and to read more, that isn't a preparation for understanding the preparation of annual accounts. And nor is it a preparation for the governance issues that go across the board. And I think that while in some areas inexperience or even incompetence can be a factor, we also have to reckon with the fact that these are positions of power. They are positions of significant status, and the role of trustees and experienced governance professionals in ensuring that the personal motivations of head teachers do not get in the way of and are never a problem is a very important one. I have been I've always felt genuinely supported by chairs of governors and trustees and by my current trust board. But the single thing which I would ask of anybody being on a trust board to be really confident of is that you can challenge school leaders, chief executives and professionals, because we are dealing here with young people's one opportunity at education. And we cannot simply take it on faith that everything in a school is being done properly, nor can we wait for external intervention. It is the awareness of the trustees of what is happening in the day-to-day life of the trust and of the local governing bodies who have a feel, the difference between a good trust board and a good local governing body and one which is not effective is that it does notice when there are the warning signs, and it is prepared to intervene and to ask the questions that need to be asked. Now, having dealt with the worst case scenarios of where the leadership is not doing what it should and it needs to be overseen, let's go back to the positive picture of what the trust is for and what it can achieve. And I've summarized here very briefly what I think are 4 key benefits: lightening the administrative load on schools. I've hope illustrated that a little bit in the slide that I showed about the number of things that can distract senior leadership in a school from its core purpose. The schools are always tight on budgets, even when we say we're not, we are. And I think that the sharing of resources and the centralization of some core functions has a significant benefit in enabling schools to be to get more value focused on more of their expenditure focused on pupils. We've got the sharing of high levels of professional expertise, and I will come back to that in a further slide very shortly. And I think this then links in to what I was just talking about, the safety net, effective and timely intervention well before it would happen otherwise. I have taught in a number of schools where things had gone wrong to the point that the school was expecting a poor Ofsted outcome, but the warning signs had been there years before. And sometimes a phrase that I'm quite familiar with is somebody saying that the worst thing that happened to the school was when it got good in the last Ofsted, because there was an opportunity for intervention there. This is where we come back to the strength of governance and expertise across a trust. Now, it's a huge responsibility on an individual governing body to know what is going on. When you are part of a trust, you have the opportunity to come together with governors from other schools to share information about how the different schools are doing relative to each other. So I do believe that one of the strengths of the trust is that opportunity to intervene and support any underperforming school is much stronger than it would be with an individual maintained school. I think this is especially true for trusts on a relatively small and local scale. If I go now to Newham Community Schools Trust, you'll see just how local we are, because the map in the bottom right corner of the screen is a map of Newham. And as you can see, our 4 schools are very closely located to each other. My office is probably somewhere in the median point between those 4, and I can get to any of the schools on my bike in just under 15 minutes. And of course, that means people can go from school to school. It's we have a huge emphasis on collaboration, but we also know our community very well. And I think many of our governors and trustees come from that community. So our trust boards and our governing boards are a fantastic blend of people who know the specifics of Newham and people who are bringing the skills that we need to ensure we're effective in all the areas that we have to be effective in. I will touch briefly on the trust's vision and values. I'm not sure that this is much more engaging than the DFE slide, but if I can put it in the terms I put it to myself most often, I see no reason why young people from Plaistow or from Canning Town shouldn't have the same opportunities for success as students at any other school in the country. So our driving purpose is to ensure that they do have those opportunities and that we maximize all the benefits of the network of skills and experience in the trust to give it to those young people. Because when you work with those young people, you see that they have the huge potential that they have. We are working in one of the most deprived boroughs in London and thus also in the country. We work with a fantastic diversity of students, but I genuinely think that the people who get involved in the trust, the people who come and work with us, see our students as as a real pleasure to work with, and that leads to many people choosing to stay in the trust. And if I could just go back to some of the benefits of the trust now and what this means in practice in my final 2 slides, just a little bit about what is different for our schools now that we are in a trust. So one difference is that instead of the head teachers acting in isolation, they meet regularly with the chief executive, as myself. I'm a former head teacher in the trust, and our school improvement advisor, And so the leadership have that opportunity to bounce ideas off each other very regularly on current issues. And our senior leadership teams are now meeting on a termly basis. So the sense of operating in islands or in isolation, or always having to reinvent the wheel in your own school and take on challenges, COVID being an obvious example, where we were continuously sharing ideas about what the best ways were to respond to, whether it was the HR problems of how to support staff or deal with lots of staff absence, or the recovery issues for young people, obviously. We've got a lot of opportunities coming through now that COVID is over for students to work together. Youth safety is a huge issue in our area, so we have a fantastic Youth Safety Council setting up the cross-trust debating competition and sports events for the summer. And our students themselves get a real buzz out of meeting other young people from the area. I think that gives an excitement. It's a positive highlight within the school year for them. Subject leaders work together. We have specialist networks within the trust. We're doing cross-trust reviews and sharing expertise. Very importantly, staff development, absolutely central to our vision of how we work. And we have one school that we've taken on because it was graded inadequate. And there's been a significant infusion of new talent into that school at middle and senior leadership level by being able to steer staff towards opportunities there or second staff. And that school is making very significant progress. And quite excitingly, we're now consulting with 2 primary schools about their joining the trust. So I am convinced that despite my reservations about the overall landscape in which we're working and the structures within which we're working, we can't influence those, or we can't influence them to a significant degree. But what we can do is assessing that landscape. I'm convinced that the trust model is a really powerful way to not only develop school improvement, but to me, as somebody who really believes in the ethos of public service, I often think of a quote from the philosopher Isaiah Berlin, who said, "The first duty of public life is to avoid extremes of harm." If you have worked in a school which is undersubscribed, where behavior is very poor, staff are demoralized, students are leaving whenever their parents can get them out to another school, it's a very horrible place for the adults to work, but it's also a really bad place for the students. If we can use our trust networks to ensure that all our schools are at a standard that we can confidently recommend them to young people, that to me is a really significant achievement. And I do think that the role of the trust in ensuring there is a level of standards across the group is a very important way of achieving that. The contribution that WICSA has, the company has made to supporting Newham Community Schools Trust is just something I want to highlight for a moment. We've had, some of you will know Christina Parry, John Ainsworth, David himself as the governor. We've had some outstanding individuals providing exactly the right blend of encouragement, but also scrutiny, and bringing a fresh and different perspective, which has been really valuable to us. And I'm delighted that there is the opportunity to continue that. There's also been some really specific points of help, and Charlotte Robinson has asked me to flag up today the huge success of the Outward Bound activities at Rokeby, which is one of a number of areas. But she had these rather lovely photos. The young men appear to have been made to jump into extremely cold water, which they also seem to have enjoyed very much. But I think it's a big enhancement of what we can do for young people, that we have this strong connection with yourselves. So I would just like to say how much I appreciate the opportunity to speak to you today. And I hope that some of you on the call will take the opportunity, those of you who are not already trustees or governors will take the opportunity to be involved in the future. And be delighted to answer any questions as far as I can.
Well, thank you very much indeed, Anthony, for that. You have ranged seamlessly from the political landscape to the practicalities, which of course is the world which we have to operate in as governors. We have one observation on the chat, but before we go to that, I'd just like to add one or 2 points, and I'll just give a heads up to Christina Parry, who sits on the trust board, the Newham Trust Board. But just 1 or 2 observations from being a governor about how a trust, a multi-academy trust, has been beneficial to Rugby School. Now, we have from the company supported various leadership training for the boys. Yes, leadership training for the boys. There is a school council at Rugby, which is run by the pupils. A teacher sits in, but the pupils are in charge. They know they're in charge. They do things properly. They do things democratically. And as a company, we've had a little role in funding the sort of leadership training for them to do that. Now, not only do they get that within Rugby, there is now leadership training across the trust. And they are meeting with student leaders in other schools, learning about how the values of other schools get put into practice and so on. And so those boys are immediately getting a broader leadership training as a result of being a trust. One thing which we're all concerned about as governors is that we should at least keep the quality ranking that we have achieved from Ofsted, and ideally take it up. And just occasionally, for reasons which we can all imagine, areas of the school dip. Now, before going into the trust, it was necessary to bring in external consultants or make staff changes or something like that. What we now have is a trust which has got relative strengths and weaknesses in all of the schools. And within the trust, there can be various types of assistance, whether it's people moving across, working in other schools for a little while, whether it's development groups and so on. And so it's building on what Anthony said, it's the trust taking responsibility for enabling all of the schools to up their game. And from the perspective of a governor, this has been a huge benefit, because before we formally became a trust, the schools were working informally, and that benefit was certainly apparent. And then what about the teachers themselves? Now, I know there are political issues around trusts, and I know that some of those political issues probably got in the way, probably delayed some of the decision making. But what we actually have now is an environment where a very able teacher who is equipped to become an assistant head, but can't become an assistant head in their current school because there isn't a vacancy, now can be considered by 3 other schools without the trust losing the experience and the benefit and expertise of that particular person. So staff in the schools, if they want to stay in the area and so on, they then have a much better opportunity to move on. I think my final point before I open the webinar for discussion, or although I may put a first question to David and Anthony, is about administration. Now, as governors, we have to diligently go through a whole raft of policies every year or every 2 years to make sure that the school complies, and arguably better than that, is excellent in that various aspect of running. Now, some of those schools, I shall fight tooth and nail to remain, some of those policies, I shall fight tooth and nail to remain the responsibility of the school, because they're very tied up with the school's values and they're important for that school. There are other policies which are much more generic, where it makes perfect sense for the trust to invest a little bit, perhaps, to come up with an absolute state-of-the-art policy which can be applied across all of the schools. And that can be done without affecting or interfering with the character of those schools. And the way I see that is that it should enable us as governors to spend more time on those things which will add more value to that particular school. Now, there are other benefits as well. I'll just mention international. Rokeby has an absolutely brilliant international set of engagements, some of which the livery company has helped to fund. It would be entirely positive if those opportunities were available to pupils in other schools as well. And there are other opportunities that Rokeby school boys might take. So they're just a handful of very practical advantages which I have seen. Now, Christina, sorry to put you on the spot, but you too are a governor. You are a governor of the trust, and you've a long experience in this. Could I invite you, is there anything that you would like to add from your experience to what David and Anthony and I have shared this evening about the benefits of being a multi-academy trust?
Well, thank you very much for giving me the chance to talk. I would like to say that I wholeheartedly go along with what the three speakers so far have said, and I won't duplicate any of that, I hope. The one thing that possibly we haven't given much attention to, where I think it touches on what Anthony was saying about the perspective that someone who's not in a school environment can perhaps add. And I'm in that category, not in a school environment. I've never been an actual teacher, so I feel great trepidation when I speak as a trustee, quite frankly. However, the things that I try and keep in mind always are the actual basic values that the organisation is trying to instill and to promote. And I think that's where at Mulberry, David Gracie and colleagues have done spectacularly with getting back to that essence of value and having sort of very clear organisational values. Certainly in Newham, it's Newham, the community. It's excellence for everything. Now, at the moment in the map, we don't perform excellently on absolutely everything, but that is the value and the aspiration. So you can have quite an input on that. I think we ought to recognise a bit more strongly than we have done. These are big environments. They really are very significant organisations. And so almost the DNA of big organisations, if you've had experience of it, you can add value to the way that big environment is perceived, because it's a very subtle environment in many ways. It's also a dynamic one. Change, change, change. And we've seen that in what David Gracie said, what David Locke said, and what Anthony Wilson has said. And I would say that if you're in a changing environment, and as it happens, both these trusts we've been hearing about are expanding trusts. And by the way, if ever you get a job, always work in an expanding organisation, because you'll have a much better experience, a much better job. Anyway, they are big growth environments, but we have to recognise it's not all roses. There aren't just economies of scale, there are also diseconomies of scale. And having had some exposure to what can go wrong, and quite frankly, if you've got any seniority at all, you will have had exposure to things going wrong. That can be quite a useful input, is the way I see it. And I think the value that an external person can bring as well is to keep the overall organisation focused on strategy, not to get bogged down in the weeds, because we all know when you're at the desk, you know, it's the day job and you tend to get bogged down in that. Whereas having this very professional structure of governance gives external people the chance to very gently try and just keep your eye on the horizon, not just on the desk. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Christina, very much for that. We have an observation in the chat from Stephen about a comment, David, which you made about paying the chair of trustees. And it's a question which universities are addressing as well, because the chairs of these bodies do take on incredible responsibilities. And if you have the sort of situation which you had to, or your school had to deal with a few years ago, where the school is in the public eye and the chair is in the front line, then you know, nothing less than the chair of or a proficient chair of a company is going to be able to survive and to represent the school credibly in that. Yet at the same time, the Charity Commission very much prefers these posts to be voluntary posts. Now, David, do you have observations on whether the chair might be paid, what the advantages are and not, and the effects for the system as a whole?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, I think just to make the point absolutely clear, none of us at Mulberry are looking to get paid. I think just to say that, because actually I do firmly believe that, you know, this is a great thing to do on a voluntary basis, and I think it just shows that actually it demonstrates the right intent. Where I think the challenge comes is where you've got mats that are of a greater scale than Mulberry and Newham, where you have, you know, the time commitment probably then starts to go into, you know, a really large space. And how can you really make sure that you've got people spending the right amount of time and devoting the right amount of time to it? And, you know, is it any different to being a non-exec of a corporate? And now again, I tend to go to a lot of my trust meetings and local governing body meetings and apply a corporate lens to a lot of these things. Sometimes it's a great idea, sometimes it's not a great idea. You know, you got to understand what works. So it really is a balancing act. But for me, the main thing is, how can you make sure you've got the right level of focus and scrutiny by trustees, particularly when you think about the size of the organisations. As Christina said, you know, there are a huge number of people involved, students, teachers, staff, where you then multiply that across. There are a lot of people that are reliant on some of the decisions that you're making. How can you make sure you're getting the best decisions? So, you know, there isn't a right or wrong answer on that one. I would prefer it to be voluntary, but I think I also recognise that the challenge that's there, and sometimes you need to make sure you get the right people in, and sometimes you might have to incentivize getting some of those people in as well.
Thank you, David. We are very close to the end of our time, but can I ask, are there any other questions or comments that people would like to make before I just say a few words and then hand to the master? Well, in which case, what I would like to do, apart from thanking David and Anthony for two very different but very complementary presentations. They, if I may say so, have delivered perfectly on the briefs which we discussed beforehand to give us an overall view about MATS and about the interaction of our company with, in the future, 2 multi-academy trusts rather than 2 schools. And I think that's been enormously helpful. I'll be honest, it does raise some issues for us as a company, because supporting 8, 9 or more schools to the level that we've been able to support 2 is an immediate challenge. But given how worthwhile all of this is, my hope is that Liveryman and that the company will be able to rise to this, especially seeing the benefits that the involvement of the livery company can deliver. And thank you, Anthony, for showing some of those slides and chairing the Rugby Community Committee. I do get feedback on those events. What I would say is this: the boys may forget a lot of what they do in school, but they will not forget the experience that they had on Outward Bound, the visit they had to somewhere or other, especially given the careful way in which these things are planned. To Liveryman, I hope that tonight, if you are not already, you may have been inspired to take an interest in becoming a governor. And over the next 2 or 3 years, there will be more opportunities. And I would be delighted if you wanted to email me, davidlocke@hotmail.com, no dot, and very happy to have a conversation with you. What I think we've done tonight is we've shared the livery company's strategy. I think we have enthused people about the value of being a governor. And what I'd like to do now is just hand to our master to close the webinar.
Yes, thank you very much indeed, David, and a huge thank you to both David and to Anthony. As David knows, and I know Christina does as well, I have been involved in school governance for more years than I would care to remember or even admit to. And I was privileged to be involved on a trust board, setting up one of the early MATs, and also as being their company secretary. So it's been delightful to hear about how some of you have faced setting up a MAT in an environment that I'm sure was more challenging than mine was, because I was in a local authority where all the schools were encouraged, and I shouldn't quite say forced, but certainly forcibly encouraged to become academies. So MATs were, if you like, pushing it open doors. Certainly, I would encourage everybody who has heard something this evening to come forward and to be involved in governance. You get an awful lot back. I certainly have gained a huge amount from my years as a governor. and one might call it slightly self-indulgent, but certainly I have enjoyed it enormously. So all I can say is, if you do have some time, do please step forward, because I know the schools will be hugely grateful. And certainly thank you to both of you very much again. And we look forward as a company to continuing and developing and looking forward to, because it was alluded to, your strategies for growth, because survival is in growth in terms of maths. So can I encourage everyone to put your hands together and say thank you very much indeed for a lovely evening.